The hills of Kentucky have a way of raising people with grit. The land rolls easy, but the people who come from it don't. In small towns just outside Nashville's Echo, the days begin early, before the sun breaks through mist and farmland. Here, faith and discipline aren't taught in books. They're learned from dirt under the fingernails, from doing what needs to be done because no one else will. It was in this world that Leigh Ann Hester was born. She wasn't raised with the intention of becoming a hero. There were no headlines in her future, no silver stars gleaming in premonition. Just a quiet, athletic girl who loved the outdoors, sports, and the company of people who told things straight. Friends remember her as tough, the kind of young woman who didn't flinch from hard work, who didn't back down from competition, but who also had that grounded Southern kindness that made her approachable. Her father worked long hours, and her mother, who was devoted to keeping the family stitched together, instilled in her a simple creed. If you start something, you finish it. That line would echo years later in the dust of Iraq, when finishing something meant staying alive. As a teenager, Leigh Ann wasn't what you'd call a troublemaker, but she had a restless streak. She liked challenges, things that tested both body and mind. She played softball, took to hiking, and had that mix of confidence and humility that defines the best soldiers long before they ever put on a uniform. The world, though, wasn't easy. Growing up in the 1980s and 1990s, she saw the military as one of the few places where discipline, respect, and purpose still meant something. By the time she was in her early 20s, the idea of service had settled in her like a calling. The Kentucky Army National Guard offered exactly what she wanted: structure, adventure, and a sense of belonging to something bigger. It wasn't about patriotism slogans or politics. It was about duty, about earning her place in a system that rewarded merit, not talk. She enlisted, and the uniform felt right. Basic training was brutal for most, but she adapted quickly. The heat, the drills, the endless repetition, none of it fazed her. There was something in her tone, in the way she addressed superiors, that made even the drill sergeants take notice. She wasn't loud. She wasn't looking for attention. But when she moved like someone who had already decided who she was. Becoming a military police officer, Leigh Ann chose the military police, MP, branch, one of the toughest and most versatile roles in the Guard. MPs serve as both law enforcers and combat soldiers. They patrol, escort, and protect, part cop, part soldier, part diplomat. It's a role that demands mental sharpness as much as physical courage. For a woman, that choice wasn't common in those days. The early 2000s were still an era when many thought women didn't belong near front lines. But Hester had no patience for that debate. If you can do the job, you can do the job, she'd later say. Her view was simple: prove yourself through performance. During training, she excelled in marksmanship and small unit tactics. She was known for calmness under pressure, a quality that separates true leaders from those who just wear the rank. Her fellow guardsmen respected her because she never pulled the "I'm different" card. She carried the same packs, fired the same weapons, and marched the same miles. Her unit, the 617th Military Police Company, based in Richmond, Kentucky, was a close-knit group. Many were part-time soldiers with full-time civilian lives. Some were farmers, mechanics, and college students. They trained together on weekends, bonded over stories, and knew that someday they might have to rely on each other in ways civilians couldn't imagine. That someday came faster than anyone expected. The world changes. On September 11, 2001, the towers fell and America's wars began. For many in the National Guard, that moment flipped a switch. What was once weekend training turned into full-scale deployment readiness. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq would stretch the Guard farther than ever before in U.S. history. By 2004, the Iraq War had become a deadly grind. Convoys of supply trucks, carrying food, weapons, and fuel, were being ambushed daily on dusty roads. Insurgents struck from fields and city alleys, vanishing before soldiers could respond. MPs like Hester's company were suddenly in the thick of combat, securing highways, escorting convoys, and facing ambushes as a matter of routine. When the call came for the 617th MP Company to deploy, Leigh Ann was ready. She'd trained for years for exactly this. Friends say she didn't hesitate. She packed her gear, hugged her family, and went to war not with bravado, but with that quiet, professional certainty that defines seasoned soldiers. Do the job, protect your people, come home. Arrival in Iraq. Baghdad, 2005. The air was a mix of dust and diesel. Convoys rumbled through the desert like steel snakes, their windows coated in grime, their crews wired tight from tension. Every pothole could hide an IED. Every parked car might be rigged with explosives. Every hill could hide the muzzle flash of an AK-47. The Kentucky Guardsmen set up operations near Camp Liberty, one of the U.S. bases west of Baghdad. Their missions were constant: secure supply routes, patrol dangerous stretches of road, respond to attacks. Sleep came in short bursts. Adrenaline became a way of life. Leigh Ann Hester, by then a sergeant, was in charge of a small squad of MPs. Her role was tactical, leading convoys, reading the terrain, making split-second decisions. The soldiers who served under her trusted her. She had that rare quality, a leader who didn't demand respect, she earned it. Even in downtime, she trained them hard. Vehicle drills, dismount procedures, target acquisition, every skill had to become reflex. Iraq was unpredictable. One moment it was calm, the next, chaos. In early March of 2005, intelligence reports warned of increased insurgent activity near Route Pluto, a stretch of road southeast of Baghdad used by supply convoys. Hester's unit was assigned to escort and protect a line of trucks carrying vital goods to coalition bases. It sounded routine. But in war, routine doesn't exist. As dawn broke on March 20th, 2005, the Kentucky soldiers rolled out. Engines hummed, radios crackled, and the horizon shimmered with heat. They had no idea that within the hour, they would be caught in one of the fiercest firefights of the entire Iraq campaign. And that one woman from Kentucky would rewrite U.S. military history. The Iraqi desert doesn't whisper, it roars. It's a place where wind carries more than dust, it carries dread. The air itself feels heavy with waiting, as if the horizon knows something the soldiers don't. In early 2005, the American war machine rolled endlessly across this landscape, convoys of trucks and Humvees grinding their way through tan plains that looked calm but hid death in every ditch. For Sergeant Leigh Ann Hester, the days had begun to blur. Every morning looked the same. Wake before dawn, strap on body armor, check the M4, mount up in the Humvee, and roll out into a world where the line between safety and chaos was invisible. Iraq had a rhythm, one that could turn from boredom to terror in seconds. The 617th Military Police Company had been in country for months by then. They'd gotten used to the endless stretches of road, the convoys that snaked through villages where locals watched silently from windows. They'd learned to read the terrain the way hunters read the forest, noticing small changes, new piles of dirt, an oddly parked car. Every sign could mean an IED, an improvised explosive device, buried just deep enough to tear through armor. The war on the road. Convoy duty was one of the most dangerous jobs in Iraq. It looked simple: protect the trucks that carried food, water, ammunition, and fuel. But those convoys were lifelines, and insurgents knew it. The roads were the arteries of the occupation, and to cut them was to bleed the U.S. Army slowly. The MPs weren't infantry, but Iraq didn't care about job titles. Out there, every soldier was a fighter. Leigh Ann's convoy missions usually ran with a mix of Humvees at the front and back, providing overwatch for dozens of slow-moving transport trucks. They'd roll in tight formation, maintaining just enough distance to avoid chain reaction blasts if one vehicle was hit. The heat was relentless. Soldiers drank liters of water a day just to stay upright. Sweat mixed with gun oil, and the inside of armored vehicles became ovens. Yet amid all that discomfort, there was something else, a quiet sense of brotherhood and routine that kept them sane. Leigh Ann rode shotgun, her rifle close, scanning the terrain constantly. She'd grown instinctive, always watching for odd movements, flickers of light, or broken patches of road. Her mind worked like a radar, always spinning. Her soldiers often joked that she had a sixth sense for trouble. A country of shadows. By early 2005, Iraq was in chaos. The insurgency had spread far beyond Fallujah and Baghdad. Militias, foreign fighters, and criminals blended together in what felt like a war without front lines. Every civilian could be a friend or a foe. It wore on soldiers' nerves. The 617th often passed through towns where children would wave at them one day and throw rocks the next. Women peeked from doorways. Men lingered near corners, some just curious, others watching too closely. The MP's job was to protect without provoking, to stay alert without losing their humanity. That balance was something Leigh Ann understood instinctively. She was professional but not robotic. Her squad said she had a calm voice even in the worst situations, a combat quiet that steadied everyone else. In off hours, she'd unwind with music or cards, sometimes talking about home, the woods, the smell of rain in Kentucky. But she rarely spoke of fear. It wasn't that she didn't feel it. She just managed it better than most. Still, no one in Iraq truly relaxed. The war's tension was like electricity, invisible, but always humming. Route Pluto. On the map, Route Pluto didn't look like much. Just another supply route cutting through the dusty expanse southeast of Baghdad. But to American convoys, it was notorious, a hotspot for ambushes. Insurgents favored that stretch because it was open farmland with long, straight sight lines. They could plant roadside bombs, hide in irrigation ditches, and strike from orchards, disappearing before air support arrived. By March, the MPs knew the area too well. They'd run that route multiple times, always wary, always tense. Leigh Ann's squad was part of a convoy escort mission that morning, routine, as the mission brief had said. But routine, in Iraq, was a curse word. The eve of battle, the night before the mission, the MPs checked their weapons and vehicles as always. Each Humvee was armed with an M240B machine gun, plenty of ammunition, and grenades. Radios were tested. Maps were reviewed. Leigh Ann was methodical. She made sure her soldiers knew the plan, knew their sectors of fire, knew where to move if things went bad. She didn't waste words. Her authority came from competence. Her team, including Staff Sergeant Timothy Neen, her convoy commander, trusted her completely. Before turning in, she cleaned her rifle again, more from habit than necessity. Soldiers often say that cleaning a weapon is a way of calming the mind, a ritual of control in a world where almost nothing can be controlled. Morning came early. The air was thick with the smell of exhaust and sand. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the sky was beginning to glow pale orange. The convoy rolled out, trucks loaded, gunners alert, everyone scanning. There was no sign of what was coming. But somewhere ahead, in the fields beside Route Pluto, about 50 insurgents were already waiting, hidden in trenches, armed with machine guns, AK-47s, and rocket-propelled grenades. They'd been watching the road for hours, waiting for just this convoy. In a few minutes, they'd open fire. And Leigh Ann Hester, the young sergeant from Kentucky who joined the guard looking for purpose, would find herself in the middle of a firefight so fierce it would etch her name forever into U.S. military history. The morning was already hot. Heat rose in waves from the road as the convoy moved across the flat farmland southeast of Baghdad. The sky was a pale haze, the kind that makes everything shimmer, like a mirage. Inside the Humvees, engines hummed and radios whispered with coded chatter. The MPs of the 617th Military Police Company were halfway through their escort mission along Route Pluto. A name the soldiers joked sounded peaceful, though nothing about that road was. Leigh Ann Hester rode second in the line of armored Humvees, eyes scanning through the dusty windshield. Every soldier knew the routine. Watch the shoulders of the road, scan the rooftops, look for anything out of place. A pile of dirt that wasn't there yesterday, a glint of metal, a cluster of people where there usually weren't any. She shifted her grip on the rifle resting across her lap. It wasn't fear that sat in her stomach. It was awareness, a steady tension that came from months of driving the same dangerous routes. Then, at 10:45 a.m., the comm snapped. A flash to the right. The heavy boom of an explosion punched the air, followed instantly by a burst of small arms fire that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The ambush. The convoy ground to a halt under a storm of gunfire. Rounds cracked against armor. Over the radio, voices overlapped, short, sharp, professional. Contact right. Contact right. Leigh Ann didn't freeze. She opened her door, crouched behind the Humvee, and started assessing. The insurgents had struck from a long irrigation trench parallel to the road, using the fields as cover. This wasn't a few gunmen. It was a coordinated assault. She shouted orders over the noise, her voice clear and calm, directing her gunner, calling for her squad to return fire. marking the direction of the attack. The machine guns on the Humvees answered in rhythmic bursts. Staff Sergeant Timothy Neen, the convoy commander, was a few vehicles ahead. Through the radio came his voice, steady, measured, telling her to move with him, to flank the trench. Decision under fire. In that instant, she made the choice that would define her career. Most soldiers would have stayed behind armor, trading fire from the road. But Hester and Neen decided to take the fight to the attackers, to move off the road and clear the trench line from end to end. She gathered her team, checked ammunition, and started moving on foot across open ground. The smell of dust and cordite hung heavy in the air. Every step was calculated. Stay low, stay fast, stay together. They used hand signals and short, controlled bursts from their rifles. Training took over. This was what months of drills had been for, not panic, but process. As they reached the trench, the world narrowed to moments. The sound of boots hitting hard soil, the thud of grenades in the distance, the feel of adrenaline turning time slow. Hester led her soldiers along the edge, communicating by gesture more than words. They moved like a single organism, each covering the other. Clearing the line. For nearly half an hour, the MPs methodically swept the trench and the surrounding orchard. The attackers began to break under the coordinated push. Radio calls confirmed that the convoy's wounded had been pulled to safety and that the route was secured. When the firing finally faded, the silence felt unreal. Dust hung in the sunlight. The air smelled of smoke and dry earth. Hester stood still for a long second, breathing hard, ears ringing from the concussions. Around her, her soldiers checked weapons, reloaded, and regrouped. Everyone was alive. They had held the line and driven the ambush back. After the echo, over the net, voices started to sound almost normal again. Reports of ammunition counts, requests for medical evacuation for a few injured truck drivers, confirmation that the convoy was ready to move. Leigh Ann keyed her radio and gave a brief, clear statement. Enemy contact ended. Route secure. Her tone carried no drama. She was a soldier giving a report. But in that brief engagement, something monumental had happened. A 23-year-old National Guard sergeant had led an assault through an enemy position, protecting dozens of convoy personnel and changing what many believed possible for women in combat. When the unit finally rolled back toward base, the adrenaline drained, leaving a quiet that felt heavier than exhaustion. No one talked much. There was only the rattle of the engines and the desert wind pressing against the convoy's sides. Hester stared out the window as the sun lowered toward the horizon. She didn't think about medals or history. She thought about her squad, alive, safe, ready to do it again tomorrow if ordered. That was the soldier's measure of success. When the convoy rolled back into camp that afternoon, the base seemed unnaturally still. Engines shut off one by one, and the sudden silence pressed down on everyone. The dust that had followed them for miles drifted away slowly, leaving streaks on their uniforms and faces. Inside the wire, routine kicked in again. Weapons cleared, vehicles refueled, radios handed in for debrief. But beneath the procedure was something else. The realization that they had just survived one of the largest and best organized ambushes ever launched against a U.S. convoy in that sector. Leigh Ann Hester didn't look like anyone's idea of a hero that day. Her face was streaked with sweat and dirt, her hair plastered down under her helmet, her uniform stiff with dust. She didn't smile or celebrate. She just sat for a few minutes on a stack of sandbags, breathing, processing. Someone handed her a bottle of warm water. She took a sip, nodded a quiet thanks, and finally allowed herself to exhale. The report. Army procedure requires every engagement to be documented in detail. Who fired, when, where, how many enemy, how many friendly wounded. Hester and Staff Sergeant Timothy Neen spent hours that evening writing their statements. The language was dry, full of military acronyms and coordinates, but between the lines it told a story of extraordinary initiative. Higher command reviewed the reports, compared radio logs, and spoke with witnesses from the convoy. The pattern was clear. When the ambush hit, Hester had not only reacted instantly, but had taken decisive action, leaving cover, maneuvering her squad, and directly engaging an entrenched enemy force. To the officers reading the reports back in Baghdad, it stood out immediately. Her actions hadn't just been brave, they had been tactically brilliant. Within days, Word started to spread quietly through the chain of command. Someone in the operations tent said, almost with disbelief, that MP Sergeant led the counterattack herself. The answer was yes. Recognition begins. For the soldiers of the 617th, life moved on quickly. Convoy missions didn't stop for heroism. They were back on the road within a week, as cautious and professional as ever. But a few weeks later, messages began to arrive from higher headquarters. Commendations were being processed. When her commander told her that she was being recommended for the Silver Star, she reportedly looked puzzled. "For what?" she asked. "For what you did out there," he said. "For taking charge when everyone else was pinned down." She didn't argue, but she didn't make much of it either. Among soldiers, the real honor was that everyone came home alive. The Silver Star Ceremony. On June 16, 2005, at a ceremony on base in Iraq, the Army officially awarded Sergeant Leigh Ann Hester the Silver Star. The medal's citation read that she had distinguished herself through exceptional valor in close-quarters combat, crediting her with leadership that turned an ambush into a victory. Standing beside her that day was Staff Sergeant Timothy Neen, who also received the Silver Star. Their fellow MPs looked on, some grinning proudly, others clapping quietly. The moment was historic. Hester became the first woman in U.S. history to receive the Silver Star for direct combat action. When reporters later asked her how it felt, she shrugged slightly and said, "It's not about being a woman out there. It's about being a soldier." It was a simple line, but it captured the essence of her character. She hadn't gone into that fight to prove anything about gender or policy. She had gone in because her squad needed her, and the job required it. The spotlight. The news traveled fast. American media, hungry for stories that showed courage amid the war's chaos, picked it up immediately. Newspapers ran headlines calling her the woman who fought back. Television crews requested interviews. Hester found herself answering the same questions again and again. How did it feel to be the first? Were you scared? What went through your mind? She answered politely but briefly. She didn't embellish or dramatize. Her humility impressed people almost as much as her actions had. Behind the public attention, though, she remained grounded. When the ceremony ended, she went back to work. Convoys still needed escorts. Soldiers still had jobs to do. Inside the ranks, among her fellow soldiers, respect for her was already absolute. The men who had fought beside her didn't see her as a symbol, they saw her as part of their team. But among younger women across the military, her name started to circulate as proof that capability mattered more than stereotype. Recruiters began mentioning her story to new enlistees. At training bases, instructors told her story as an example of composure under pressure. In briefings and PowerPoint slides, her name became shorthand for leadership. She never sought that role, yet it found her. Quiet pride. When her deployment finally ended and she returned home to Kentucky, the welcome was warm but restrained. Family, friends, and community members hugged her, thanked her, and asked what it had been like. She answered with the same measured modesty that had marked her career. She didn't hang the medal in a place of display. It stayed in a box for a long time. For her, the real honor was knowing that she'd done what the situation demanded, that she'd made decisions that kept her people alive. The Army's paperwork, the photographs, the ceremonies, those were formalities. The essence of it all was simpler. When the moment came, she had acted. By the time Leigh and Hester returned to Kentucky, the world had changed slightly, though she herself hadn't. The medals, the newspaper headlines, the fleeting fame, they were all external. Inside, she remained the same sergeant who had trained, led, and fought alongside her squad with quiet resolve. But her story had already begun to ripple far beyond the desert roads of Iraq. A symbol emerges. Hester's actions challenged long-held assumptions in the U.S. military. For decades, women had been excluded from combat roles, confined to support positions far from the front lines. Many policymakers and military leaders questioned whether women could handle direct combat, or whether they belonged in high-stress engagements where split-second decisions could mean life or death. When news of her heroism spread, the conversation changed. She became living proof that courage, skill, and leadership were not determined by gender. Young female soldiers, many of whom had wondered whether they could ever rise to positions of influence in combat situations, suddenly had a model to look toward. At training facilities and military academies, Instructors began citing Hester's ambush response as a case study in leadership under fire. Her tactical decisions, calm under pressure, and willingness to take initiative became lessons for soldiers of all ranks. Policy implications. Hester's story coincided with a broader reevaluation of women's roles in combat. While full integration into infantry and frontline positions would take years, her example accelerated discussions. By demonstrating that women could perform with distinction in direct engagements, she provided irrefutable evidence to policymakers. Combat effectiveness is measured by action, not by gender. Her Silver Star became more than a medal, it was a symbol. It was referenced in congressional hearings, military briefings, and debates about opening new combat roles to women. Hester's heroism was practical proof that women were capable of performing under the highest pressure. Personal impact. Despite the public recognition, Hester remained humble. She continued to serve in the National Guard, mentoring younger soldiers, leading exercises, and quietly demonstrating the same principles that had carried her through Iraq: preparation, composure, and selfless leadership. Her influence extended beyond the military. Veteran organizations, schools, and public forums sought her perspective, not to glorify combat, but to illustrate the values of resilience, decisiveness, and teamwork. She became a figure that embodied the concept that courage is universal. It doesn't wear a particular uniform, it doesn't require a specific gender, and it doesn't seek recognition. Legacy in modern context. Today, the military landscape has shifted in part because of trailblazers like Hester. Women now serve in infantry, artillery, and other direct combat positions that were once closed to them. Her story continues to be taught at officer training schools and leadership courses, not just as a historic first, but as an enduring example of tactical brilliance, calm under fire, and the human capacity for courage. Her legacy is also cultural. Documentaries, books, and media coverage present her as a figure who demonstrates that heroism is measured by action, not by identity. Hester's life serves as a bridge from the dusty roads of Iraq to the halls of military academies, from the skepticism of her peers to widespread recognition of women's full capabilities in war. A quiet hero. Leigh Ann Hester's life after Iraq is a reminder that true heroism often comes without fanfare. She didn't seek headlines, and she didn't fight for recognition. She fought because she was a soldier who valued her team, her mission, and her principles. Her story illustrates that courage is both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary because she followed her training and instinct. Extraordinary because she became a historic first through sheer bravery and leadership. Her impact continues quietly in the soldiers she inspires, the policies she influenced, and the lives she touched through her example. In the end, the roads she once patrolled are still dangerous, still uncertain. But soldiers now step onto them with confidence, knowing that someone like Leigh Ann Hester has proven what is possible. Closing reflection. The story of Sergeant Leigh Ann Hester is not just a story of war. It is a story of leadership, humility, and the quiet power of decisive action. It is a reminder that heroism is not defined by who you are, but by what you do when the moment demands it. And it stands as a lasting testament that courage knows no gender, that bravery transcends expectation, and that history often remembers those who act when it matters most.